Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we descend into the Appalachian hills, where graves are never still. Names fade faster than bone, and something waits in the fog between broken headstones. These 10 stories are not passed down, they are left behind. In cracked markers, in shovel-split dirt, in voices that still call from beneath moss and slate. They come from those who return trembling, and those whose boots still sit by the gate. If stories like these keep you listening, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us where you're watching from. Now dim the lights, lock the door, and listen close. Imara, 32. I had been living alone in a cabin halfway up Coal Ridge ever since Mom's health turned, and she couldn't manage on her own anymore. She stayed in a care home down in Waverly now, and I came up here for the quiet and the space. Most days were filled with little tasks, clearing gutters, chopping wood, patching leaks. But I liked that. It felt useful. That morning started like any other. The stove fire had gone out overnight, so I relit it and stirred oatmeal while my boots thawed near the vent. Cold air pressed through the windows despite the double glazing, and when I opened the front door, mist rolled over the porch like a low tide coming in. That was when I noticed it. A small stone marker sitting just inside the tree line, where the yard met the woods. It hadn't been there yesterday. I walked over, expecting maybe a fallen fence post or something a coyote dug up. But the stone wasn't old or broken. It was smooth, polished granite, no more than knee-high. No name, just a single carving across the front, a cracked hourglass with both ends empty, like someone had chipped it on purpose. My skin prickled without knowing why. That little cemetery had been abandoned since the 60s, from what locals told me. Just a family plot left over from a mining camp that collapsed, long before anyone kept proper records. It sat about 50 yards uphill, half swallowed by trees and wild sumac. I'd only passed it once, out of respect more than fear. The strange part wasn't just that the marker was new. It was that it sat outside the boundary, not quite in the yard, not quite in the cemetery, like someone had placed it there deliberately. Exactly, between. I leaned in and touched the engraving. The stone was dry, but the center of the hourglass shimmered, as if catching light that wasn't there. That night, I heard it for the first time. A faint ticking, too soft to be a clock, not rhythmic enough to be anything mechanical. It came from the direction of the woods. I turned on the porch light. Nothing but fog and pine trunks. Still, I locked the door. The next morning, the hourglass marker was gone. I searched everywhere, thought maybe a deer knocked it over or someone took it, but there weren't any drag marks. The grass looked undisturbed. When I came back inside, it was on my kitchen table, sitting dead center. No dirt, no leaves, no moisture, like someone had placed it gently, right after wiping it clean. I stood there for a long time, not moving, not breathing. The windows were still latched. I hadn't unlocked the door. Over the next few days, the marker kept moving. I'd find it at the foot of my bed. Once, on the bathroom sink, water still dripping off the faucet. It didn't matter where I locked it up. It always returned. Thursday night, the ticking got louder. I stood by the front window, holding a flashlight and listening. It wasn't mechanical. It was wet, like something knocking together in a puddle. I couldn't place the direction anymore. It was all around me. I told myself to leave. Just pack up, get in the truck, drive into town. But I couldn't. Not yet. Part of me felt pulled to stay, like I had to see it through. That's when I decided to go back up to the cemetery. I waited until afternoon. Took the old deer trail that cuts around the ridge and brings you out by the crooked oak. I'd passed that oak before. It grew sideways, like the mountain tried to spit it out. The marker wasn't at the cemetery, but something else was. A fresh grave. No name, just a square of loose earth, damp like it had been dug and filled within the last day. At its head stood a matching granite marker. No hourglass this time, just a flat face, uncarved. And then I saw him, a man, or a figure shaped like one. standing motionless between the trees just beyond the grave. Watching, not approaching. His face was hidden in shadow, but I swear he nodded. Once, slow, like someone confirming I'd finally arrived. I did not run. I should have, but I didn't. My legs felt buried in the soft earth and my breath was too thin. The man between the trees did not move, and that made it worse somehow. Like he could stand there forever and wait me out. When I finally forced myself to step back, he stayed exactly where he was, just watching. I walked out the way I came, but every few paces I had to glance back. He never followed, never turned, never blinked. But I knew I had not seen the last of him. Back at the cabin, I locked every window, even nailed a towel over the vent in the mudroom. I gathered up the hourglass marker and stuffed it in a plastic storage bin, taped it shut with everything I had left, shoved it under the stairs and blocked it with firewood. Then I sat in the middle of the living room with the lights on and the TV off. I needed noise, but I could not stand anything artificial. I tried the radio. Static. I tried my phone. No signal, even though it had worked just fine a day ago. Around 2 in the morning, the ticking came back. Louder than ever. It pulsed through the floorboards like a heartbeat. I followed it, slow and barefoot, past the fireplace and toward the bin under the stairs. The lid was open. The marker sat on top of the firewood, upright and spotless. The hourglass was no longer cracked. Instead, both chambers were full, white sand on top, black sand below. I backed away and did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I drove into town to see a friend. Karen worked in records at the county office and knew more about local graves than anyone I had met. I told her I needed information on the hillside cemetery near Coal Ridge. She hesitated when I named it. "That place is not on our official register," she said. "Used to be a mining family plot, but a priest was buried up there. Years ago, his grave was unmarked, said to be cursed." I didn't tell her about the hourglass. I didn't have to. Her face told me she already knew more than she was saying. I asked if she could come back with me, just to look. She said no, not even for 5 minutes. But she gave me a name. Father Edmund Bell, died 1949. Found in a collapsed section of the mine, hands clutching a broken hourglass. Said to have gone mad before the end. That night, I stayed at the cabin again. I left every light on. The ticking stayed silent. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off on the couch. When I woke up, it was still dark, quiet, too quiet. My throat felt dry and my arms heavy, like I had not moved in hours. I turned toward the kitchen, and he is inside, standing at the far end of the table, the same figure I saw between the trees. He does not speak. He does not reach. But the hourglass sits in front of him now, full of white sand, and I swear I can see it moving, very slowly, grain by grain. I reach for the lamp beside the couch, knock it over. Darkness swallows the room. I hear the sound of the chair sliding, a shuffle, then breath, very close, right behind my ear. I throw myself sideways. The coffee table flips. I crawl, not run, into the hall, slam the door to the bathroom and brace it with my back. The ticking is right outside, so loud I feel it in my teeth. And then, silence. I do not move for 10 full minutes. When I open the door, the kitchen is empty. The marker is gone. So is the figure. I leave the cabin before sunrise. I do not lock it. I do not even look back. Weeks pass. I stay with friends, then rent a room in Waverly, try to forget. But one morning, walking out to my car, I see something sitting on the hood. A small granite marker. No name, no cracks, just an hourglass. This time, all the sand has sunk to the bottom. Mist rolled over the ridge like slow smoke when I found the mask. I had taken the dog out for a morning walk. Same trail as always, skirting the edge of the old cemetery above Tallow Creek. It was early October, leaves half fallen, the air sharp and still damp from last night's rain. The kind of quiet that makes you whisper without knowing why. My name is Caleb, 27. I was staying in my uncle's cabin for a few weeks while he was out west. Just me and the dog, and a stack of books I told myself I'd finally read. Most mornings, we made the loop around the perimeter of the ridge, circled back by the sagging stone fence that marked the cemetery line. The mask was resting on a toppled gravestone, perfectly centered, like someone had placed it for a photograph. It was carved from wood, old but not weathered, the kind of craftsmanship you do not see anymore. The nose was long and pointed, the eye sockets deep and smooth, and there was something strange about the shape of the mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite open either. The dog froze when he saw it, ears flat, tail low, whining without barking. I knelt to touch the mask, hesitated, then picked it up. It was lighter than I expected, dry, no markings on the back. I took it home. That part still sits wrong with me. I did not know why I carried it back to the cabin, just that I felt like I should, like it belonged somewhere and I was supposed to figure that out. That night, I left it on the table by the door. Around 1 in the morning, the dog started barking. Short, sharp bursts, all aimed at the window facing the trail. When I got up to check, there was nothing, just the trees swaying, except the mask was gone. I found it sitting on my pillow, not tossed, placed, the eye holes pointing straight up at the ceiling like they had been watching something. The next day, I drove the mask back to the cemetery, put it right where I found it, even left a few coins as an offering. Then I walked away without looking back. That evening, I noticed something had changed. The light inside the cabin was wrong, dimmer than it should have been, like someone had put a film over the windows. Then came the smell. Wet dirt, like soil turned over by hand. And under that, something old and bitter, like burned cedar. At dusk, the dog refused to come inside, just stood at the tree line, growling low and steady at the cabin door. I had to carry him in. That night, I dreamed of footsteps moving around the bed, light ones, too fast for boots, someone breathing behind the wall. When I woke up, there were streaks of mud on the floorboards. Not paw prints, not mine. I told myself it had to be the dog, that maybe I was tracking dirt in and just forgot, but the mud wasn't dry. It was fresh. By the third night, the mask was back. I found it in the bathroom sink, wet and spotless, as if someone had washed it and laid it there to dry. The dog would not enter the room. He stayed crouched behind the couch until morning. I finally called the historical society in town, asked if there was anything odd about that cemetery, any legends or stories about carved masks. The woman on the phone paused longer than she should have. Then she said, "You should leave it where it was." "Is brought yet?" "I already did." I told her. She went quiet again, then said, "Not just the mask, all of it. They canes my." That was when I saw the second one. Another mask, just like the first, sitting on the front steps, eyes fixed toward the cabin door. I didn't bring the second mask inside. I barely touched it. I used the fireplace poker to flip it over, just enough to see the back. It was clean, too clean, like it had never touched the ground. That night I locked every door, pushed the dresser in front of the bedroom window, and slept with the dog curled at my feet. He twitched and whimpered all night. I don't think either of us really slept. Around 4 in the morning, I heard the front doorknob turn once. Just once. Slow. I held my breath. The door stayed shut. I gripped the poker tighter and stared at the hallway for what felt like hours. Nothing else happened. No sound. No footsteps. By sunrise, I decided to leave. I packed what I could into the truck, brought the dog, and drove straight into town. The Historical Society office was closed, but the library was open. I started digging through old newspapers, church records, anything I could find about that graveyard. That is when I found the name Burrell's Hollow. It was an unmarked burial ground for people who were considered cursed or unfit for the main church cemetery. One entry mentioned a ritual mask used during funeral processions, carved from pine, meant to confuse wandering spirits, said to be worn by the guide of the hollow. No one ever admitted who that was. I drove straight to the carpenter's place on the edge of town. He was known for restoring folk artifacts and was one of the few left who understood mountain symbols. I laid the mask down on his workbench and waited. He did not touch it. He only looked. Then he said, "That ain't the first one to find its way out, but it always finds its way back." He's at 2. I asked what I was supposed to do. He told me I could try to return it again, but this time I had to do it properly. With words, with care, and with something personal. Otherwise, he said, it might not stop with just watching. Thanks for watching. So I waited until evening, then hiked back up to the cemetery with the mask in a cloth bag, the dog trailing behind me. I brought a ribbon from my mother's funeral, a smooth river stone I had carried since college, and a photograph from the cabin mantel. Things that meant something. Things I could give. I laid the mask back on the toppled stone, spoke aloud, said I was sorry, said I did not mean to take what wasn't mine. Then I left the ribbon tied to the stone, the photo beneath the mask, and the stone resting on top. It should have ended there, but it doesn't. Later that night, as I am brushing my teeth, I feel it. Breath. Right behind my shoulder. I freeze. In the mirror. Something moves just out of frame. I spin around. Nothing. No one. The dog starts barking in the next room. Short, warning barks. I run in, and he is staring at the door, scratching at it like something is on the other side. I press my ear to the wood. There is a sound. Not scratching. Not breathing. Knocking. Slow. Rhythmic, as if someone knows I am listening. I yank the door open, poker in hand. No one there. But the third mask is. This one is smaller, child-sized, and it is carved with my initials just under the chin. I leave the next morning. I do not go back to the ridge. I do not collect my things. Months later, I get a package in the mail. No return address. Inside is the photo I left at the cemetery, and a note, in handwriting I do not recognize. It reads, "The guide always knows the way home." And tween. We had taken the old road up the mountain, the one that lost its name years ago when the signage rusted out. The truck struggled through loose gravel and patches of slick mud, branches brushing against the mirrors, like fingers. Claire kept tapping the dashboard clock. It annoyed it had frozen at 6:23 ever since we passed the ranger gate. I told her it was just the cold. Secretly, I was not so sure. My name is Jordan, 24. Claire is my little sister, 22, and stubborn as ever. She had convinced me to take a long weekend hiking trip before she started grad school, said she wanted to see something real before going back to fluorescent classrooms and recycled air. We were headed to what the map called Elk Ridge Summit, but the locals had another name for it, Graves Edge. I had only heard it once, from an old woman in a gas station who handed me a folded paper map and said, "Stay on the trail. The dead don't like to be walked through." Claire had laughed. I had not. We parked just before dusk and made camp near a ridgeline that overlooked the valley. The view was incredible. Burnt orange trees rolling out in every direction, mist curling like breath above them. The air smelled like damp leaves and old pine. That first night was quiet. A little too quiet. No bugs. No owls. Just the fire popping and our own tired voices. We passed around a can of beans and joked about ghost stories. Claire brought up the cemetery supposedly hidden near the summit, half swallowed by underbrush and never marked on modern maps. I did not tell her I had already marked it on mine. Just curiosity. I told myself, not planning to go near it. But there was something about old places like that, like they held their breath when you got close. The second day, we hiked out early. It had rained overnight, so the trail was soft and slick, our boots sinking just enough to leave prints. Around midday, Claire stopped dead. Ahead of us, in a patch of churned-up leaves, were footprints, fresh ones, heading the same direction we were. We had not seen a single other hiker. No cars, no voices, no trash, and yet, there they were, barefoot, wide set, like someone had been running. We debated turning back, but Claire wanted to keep going. Maybe. It's an old animal trail, she said, or a trick of the mud. I did not argue, but I did check the knife clipped to my belt and made sure it was still there. By late afternoon, we found the edge of the cemetery. It was not marked, just a sagging iron gate, half buried in vines and a few headstones poking out of the leaves like teeth. One of them had fallen and cracked in two. Another was nearly covered in moss. Only a few letters left, M, A, R. The rest lost to time. I turned to Claire and found her already kneeling beside a marker. She was tracing the engraved dates with her fingers. These are all children, she said. Look, none of them lived past 13. They were for May's Yuan Ascension. The air changed as she spoke. The wind stopped. The trees stood too still. I told her we should head back, but she didn't move. Do you hear that? She asked. I didn't. Not at first. Then I did. A sound like a swing creaking. Very slow. Very far. Claire stood up fast. Someone's here. Adon mentioned says. Then she froze, her eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned. There, just beyond the farthest row of graves, stood a figure. Not moving, not speaking, just there. Claire whispered, "He's watching us. This never one is a Fashion." And I swear, the figure raised its hand, not to wave, but to point, directly at Claire. I stepped between them before I could think. My boots crunched leaves. Loud in the quiet, the figure did not move. I could not even tell if he was breathing. But I saw it, then he was barefoot. Claire grabbed my arm and pulled. "We need to go," she said, her voice tight. I backed away slowly, never turning from the figure. But he didn't follow. He only watched, hand still raised. We hiked down fast. No trail markers, just instinct and fading light. Claire stumbled once, nearly twisting her ankle, but we pushed through the trees until we found the creek we had passed earlier. The sun was going down behind the ridge. The shadows came quick after that. When we finally spotted the edge of the campsite, I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The fire pit was cold. We had left it smoldering that morning, but now it was dead, scattered like someone had kicked it. Claire sat down hard and did not say a word. We stayed awake most of the night, listening, watching. The woods were not silent anymore. Something moved out there, not close, not far, just enough to remind us we were not alone. Around 2 in the morning, Claire pointed toward the tree line. "There," she whispered. I looked. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw him. The same figure, at the edge of the light, barely visible through the trees. Closer than before. Still barefoot. Still pointing. I stood up. Threw a rock. It landed somewhere near his feet. He did not flinch. I shouted. No response. Then he stepped backward. Not turning. Just one step. Then another. Slowly retreating into the dark. And gone. We packed at sunrise. No breakfast. No fire. Just shoved our gear into the bags and started down the mountain. Claire was limping, but didn't complain. We both wanted out. Halfway down, the trail vanished. The storm from 2 nights ago had washed out a section near the lower switchback. Trees had fallen across the path, and the trail markers were gone. I checked the map. Nothing helped. We were off course. Claire's limp got worse. She gritted her teeth, but I could tell her ankle was swelling. We decided to cut downhill through a narrow gully. The map showed a service road at the bottom, but the gully twisted. Too steep. Too many loose rocks. I slipped once. Caught myself on a root. Claire wasn't so lucky. She fell hard. Slid 10 feet and hit a moss-covered stone with a sound that made me sick. She screamed once, then tried to stand. Couldn't. I climbed down. Reached her. Helped her sit up. Her ankle was definitely broken. Her face was pale. Mouth pressed tight to keep from crying. "We need help," she said. I nodded. I told her to stay put while I climbed a little higher to get signal. Just a few minutes. She agreed. I left her there with a jacket and the dog's leash clipped to her pack. I climbed until I reached a ridge just above the gully, held up my phone. 1 bar, maybe 2. That was when I heard her scream. High, sharp, then cut off. I turn, look down the slope. She is gone. Just her pack, lying open. The leash clipped to nothing. The dog barking wildly, pacing in circles. I run back down, calling her name. Nothing. No sign of her. Not even tracks in the mud. Then I hear it. The creaking. Same as before. And when I look up, across the ridge, I see a swing hanging from a dead tree. It wasn't there before. And on that swing, slowly rocking, is a single boot. Claire's boot. If I had moved 1 second sooner, I might have caught her. But now she is gone. And I can still hear the swing moving. Even when the wind stops. Even now. The paper was brittle and smelled like mildew. Folded so tight, it had become stiff at the corners. I found it wedged between 2 floorboards while cleaning out my grandmother's old cabin on Narrow Creek Ridge. The writing was faded but still readable, carved in pencil with odd pressure. 4 words. Do not disturb below. When you find into the ass's way. My name is Esme. 29. I had not been back to this place since I was a kid. Back when Grandma would tell stories by lantern light and warn me not to wander too far past the hill behind the house. Now she was gone, and the place was mine to sell or restore. I came up for the weekend with the goal of sorting through her things and deciding which. The cabin sat just a few 100 feet from the tree line. Past that, the woods dipped into a hollow most people forgot. Overgrown, damp, thick with moss and fallen stone. I had always thought the ridge was just wilderness. But that note made me wonder. I slipped the paper into my pocket and went about the day. There was no cellar beneath the cabin. Just a shallow crawl space with packed dirt and rotting support beams. But the paper made it sound like something was under. Not behind, not around. Directly beneath. That night, the wind shifted, sharp and strange, coming not from the woods, but from beneath the floorboards. The fire in the stove flickered the wrong way, bending toward the walls. I heard something down there, a soft dragging sound, then 3 quick knocks. I told myself it was the house settling, nothing more. Still, I slept with the light on and the attic hatch wedged shut. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch and froze. There were symbols scratched into the dirt just below the front step. Not footprints, not tire marks. Just 3 rough X shapes in a row, like someone had used a stick to mark them. They had not been there last night. I checked the crawl space, but found no signs of animals. The boards were still sealed. No gaps. I even called a local pest control guy who offered to come the following day, just in case. But I already knew it was not raccoons. That afternoon, I decided to hike the slope behind the cabin, following the ridge toward the hollow. I brought the old field map Grandma kept in her trunk. Most of it was blank past the ridge, but near the bottom corner, drawn in faded red ink, was a circle. Inside it, a single word, Ada. I reached the spot around dusk. The trees grew dense there, trunks bowed inward like ribs around a lung. The soil was soft, sunken in places. And there, near the middle, I found it. A grave. The stone was flat and broken, half swallowed by root and vine, but someone had placed a ring of nails around the mound. Old nails, rusted, driven halfway into the earth, forming a kind of barrier. I knelt down to look closer. Something shifted under my feet. The dirt sank, just a little, and from underneath, I heard a sound. Muffled, wet, a voice, not words exactly, more like breath-forming syllables that could almost be understood. I backed away, fast, turned and ran. The trees behind me creaked, branches snapped, but I did not look back. When I reached the cabin, the lights were out, every bulb, even the lanterns, and something was waiting on the porch. A small bundle wrapped in a torn pillowcase. I stepped closer. It was the paper. The same one I found inside. Only now it said something different. Too late. She's awake. Day 7. I did not touch the bundle. Just stared at it, every hair on my neck standing up. The porch boards creaked beneath my feet, even though I was not moving. The air felt heavier than it had all day, like something had followed me back from the hollow and slipped inside the walls while I was gone. I kicked the pillowcase off the porch with the toe of my boot. It hit the ground without a sound. The paper inside fluttered once, then went still. I locked the door behind me and shoved a chair under the handle. That night, I moved my sleeping bag into the corner of the main room, away from the windows. I kept the fire going and sat with my back to the wall. The house settled around me, but the silence was different now, pressed in, like it was listening. Sometime after 2, I heard the dragging again, not beneath me this time, from the hallway. Long, slow, clawed. The door to the hallway stayed shut, but the knob turned, once, then again. Then the voice came. Soft. Wrong. Esme, let me up. Then no. I do not move. I do not breathe. The floor creaks. I hear something cross from the hall to the kitchen. Light footsteps. Bare. Wet. They leave no sound except the soft click of toenails on old wood. I waited until morning to open the door. Nothing was there. No footprints. No handprints. But on the table sat the paper again. The writing had changed once more. Feed the dirt, or she'll feed on you. Dad, now. I packed everything and drove straight into town. Showed the paper to the county historian, an older man named Albie who had worked archives for 30 years. He took one look and turned pale. Told me the name Ada matched a story from 1914. A woman accused of poisoning her entire family, buried in secret under court order. Her name was never put on the official registry. No headstone, just a placeholder. According to Albie, the townsfolk tried to bury her wrong on purpose, a way to bind the soul beneath. Nails around the grave. No cloth. No prayers. He said if that seal was broken, something old would stir. I asked what I was supposed to do. He looked at me like I already knew. Put her back to sleep, he said. I waited until dusk, then returned to the hollow. I brought a spool of wire, rusted nails from the barn, and the cloth bundle I had kicked off the porch. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside were bones. Small, burned at the ends, wrapped in hair. I gathered them in silence and stepped toward the grave. The soil had sunken lower since the last time. It pulsed at the center, like breath. I dug by hand, fingers cold, dirt soft. When I reached the edge of the old coffin, I placed the bundle inside, then hammered each nail into the soil in a circle, whispered the only prayer I could remember. Not for her, for me. As I turned to leave, the ground shudders. A hand shoots from the soil, thin, splintered, nails sharp. It grabs my boot. I freeze. The fingers curl around my ankle. Pull. I slam my other foot down, hard, stomp the hand into the dirt. It vanishes like smoke. The earth seals itself as if nothing had ever opened. I crawl away. I do not run. I crawl. I do not remember the walk back to the cabin. Only that when I arrive, the lights flicker back on. The air is still. I move out the next morning, never return. But some nights, when I lie awake too long, I hear it. 3 knocks. From under the bed, and a voice whispering soft as earth, "You didn't feed enough. That is could not." I heard it the first night, a voice calling through the trees behind the cemetery, almost soft enough to dismiss as wind, but not quite. "Sarah, Sarah," it whispered in long, breathy pulls, like someone trying not to wake the dead. But that wasn't my name. I'm Ben, 31, a freelance cartographer with a habit of chasing forgotten places. I had taken a week off to do something most people wouldn't call a vacation. Solo mapping burial grounds tucked deep in the hills, following vague notations from an 1800s ledger I found in a county archive. The forest had grown thick around this place. Thorny vines crept over headstones, as if they were trying to keep the names hidden. I pitched camp a few yards from the tree line, just far enough from the cemetery's edge to keep it out of view when I lay in my tent. But I had not planned for the voice. That first night, I sat by the fire, copying sketches into my field journal, matching crooked rows of markers to old family names. When the whispering started, I turned off the lantern and listened. Sarah, Sarah, drifting between the pines. I kept still for half an hour, then forced a laugh to break the tension and went to bed. The next evening, I returned with tools, measuring tape, chalk, a topo map spread flat on a board. I marked where roots had burst through grave covers and where rain had carved gullies around the stones. But the light fell too fast. I planted a torch in the soft ground and leaned in to trace a name. When wind swept through and snuffed the flame, I turned on my flashlight. The beam jittered, cutting across fog and fallen leaves. I thought I heard something step, just once, in the brush behind me. When I aimed the light, there was nothing but trunks and undergrowth, still as statues. Rain started just as I reached the far side of the cemetery, where 3 large markers stood crooked, half buried in the hillside. My boots slid on mud. The ground gave way. I dropped to my hands and knees, one arm plunging into wet earth. A hollow crack sounded beneath me, like stone shifting. Mud got in my eyes. It stung enough that I couldn't see. I scrambled back, wiping at my face with my sleeve. I felt around for my pack but grabbed something cold and rigid, a slab of rock pushed loose from the grave. And then, pressure, on my shoulder, like someone pressing down slowly with both hands. My breath caught. I twisted around. No one. Nothing. The rain picked up. Mist rose from the stones like smoke. I stood and backed away, half blind and slick with mud. That was when I saw it. A figure. Small, low to the ground, gliding through the rows of graves. No clear face, no clear form, just white and slow and silent. I held my breath. I did not move. It slipped between headstones like it belonged there. Closer now. I felt breath, warm, near my right ear. Then something brushed my back. The fabric of my jacket lifted, touched by fingers that weren't cold, but somehow not warm either. I spun. My hand swung the flashlight. It hit nothing. The figure had vanished into the trees. All I heard was rain. All I saw was fog. I ran, left the torch, the board, the map. Even the flashlight slipped from my grip when a root caught my boot and threw me forward. My knees hit soaked earth. I pushed myself up and stumbled toward the edge of the forest, squinting against the sting in my eyes. The fog seemed to pull tighter around the trees. Branches scraped my jacket. Somewhere behind me, something moved through the leaves. Always, just one step out of sight. I didn't stop. I didn't call out. I just ran. By the time I found the narrow deer trail that led back toward the road, the sky was getting lighter, but the air stayed thick with mist. My vision came and went, blurred with grit and rain. My right foot throbbed, the ankle swelling with every step. Birds should have been singing by now, but the forest was silent. I followed the slope down until I heard water. A narrow stream wound between 2 mossy outcrops. I dropped to my knees beside it, cupped the cold water in my hands, and rinsed the mud from my eyes. It took a few minutes before the burning faded and I could finally see again. I stayed there until the numbness in my fingers turned to pain. Then I stood and followed the creek east, remembering the ranger maps I'd studied before the trip. There was an old logging cabin, about a mile out, marked in pencil on one of the older charts. If it still stood, maybe someone would be there. I found it near midday. Smoke was not rising from the chimney, but I knocked anyway. The door opened to a man in his 60s with a long beard and a quiet stare. He let me in without asking questions. The inside smelled like pine and wood smoke. He gave me a bowl of warm rice porridge and pointed to a cot beside the hearth. I told him a little, only that I had gotten turned around in the fog. He nodded, said, "People hear things in the mist out here, stories that grow bigger with every retelling." I slept. For the first time in 2 nights, I felt warm, safe. I told myself it had been my imagination, exhaustion, maybe even a fever from the cold. When night came, I listened for the voice, but there was nothing. Just the fire and the rustle of trees. Until I woke to knocking. It comes in steady. 3 knocks. Then silence. Then 2 more. The old man does not stir. I sit up and listen. The cot creaking under my weight. The cabin door pushes in just an inch. Cold air seeps through. I move back, slowly, toward the far wall, near the window. A figure stands in the doorway. Their face is obscured by wet hair and the low angle of their head. The mist behind them curls through the gap like smoke. They do not speak. They breathe. I drop to the floor and pull the blanket over myself. I lie still. I make no sound. I hear the boards creak. 1 step forward, then another. The breath grows louder, fogging against the wood. A hand brushes the doorframe. Fingers curl around the edge. I close my eyes. My heart stutters. I do not move. The door creaks, just enough to see shadow press in. The breath stops. For a moment, everything stops. Then, footsteps. Retreating, back into the mist. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I found the edge of the door marked with damp prints. The old man never asked about it. I left before noon. Weeks passed before I touched a map again. Even now, I cannot trust the forest. Every time the fog rolls down the hills near my home, I feel that breath again. Warm, close. My field jacket still has a tear down the back. I never stitched it. No one believes what I saw. But the photos I took that night, the ones I tried to digitize, everyone came out blurred with fog. And in the corners, always the same, faint outline. A person, watching. Not Sarah. Something else. Still looking for someone. I'm Tess, 33. Mark and I had been saving for over a year, hoping to find a quiet spot to build a weekend cabin. We finally found one, the forested plot tucked near the edge of a ridge, just west of a forgotten cemetery. The price was low, the land secluded, and the view stretched out towards soft rolling hills covered in pine. We arrived late afternoon, parked at the trailhead, and hiked in with flashlights. There was no structure yet, just a clearing where the old foundation of a homestead had once stood. The cemetery was maybe 100 yards off, small and sunken, stones leaning and names worn to a blur. It didn't bother me. It was old, peaceful. That first night, though, Mark changed. He sat by the window of our rental cabin and didn't move for a long time. His plate of food went cold while he stared out into the dark, whispering things under his breath. When I leaned in, I heard him say, "They're watching from the stones. The tall one sees us. Ray dissents in human." I asked if he was joking. He blinked at me like he'd forgotten I was there, then said maybe he had been dreaming. I let it go. Told myself we were both tired from the trip, but the air in the room felt colder than it should have. And he kept glancing back toward the cemetery, even when the curtains were drawn. The next night, I woke to him standing in the same spot again, lights off, eyes fixed on the trees. I asked him what he saw. He said the gravestones were moving, that there was someone between them, stepping from shadow to shadow. I turned on the porch light, but there was nothing there, just fog rising between branches. In the morning, I found wet footprints outside the side door. They trailed from the tree line up to the back steps and stopped there. Mark said it must have been mine from the night before, but I hadn't gone out that way. He didn't come to check with me, just sat at the table, scribbling something in his notebook. That afternoon, we tried to map out the property lines again. The surveyor's sketch didn't match what we saw. Mark insisted the cemetery had moved, that some of the gravestones were in different positions than yesterday. I started to doubt myself. Even checked the compass twice to be sure. I felt dizzy, like the ground itself was shifting when I looked too long. Later that evening, Mark didn't answer when I called from the porch. I found the flashlight still on the table, but no sign of him inside. The back door was wide open. I followed the faint beam of moonlight through the woods, past the edge of the clearing. The fog had thickened again. I could barely make out the outlines of the gravestones. I called his name once. Then again. That was when I heard the sound. A low, tired breath. Not mine. Then shuffling. There, between two crooked headstones, was a figure lying face down. Arms stretched forward. Fingers splayed in the wet grass like he had reached for help. Mark. I ran. I dropped to my knees beside him and touched his shoulder. His skin is cold. He does not move. Then, suddenly, he sits upright. His face is wrong. His eyes are all white. I scramble back. He stands. Slowly. His movements are jerky, uneven. Then he turns and steps backward into the dark between the stones. Without a sound. I don't remember how long I sat there, frozen between the graves. When I finally moved, I followed where Mark had disappeared, calling his name again and again until my voice cracked. I found him a few minutes later, standing at the edge of the clearing, shivering and confused. He looked at me like he had just woken from a dream. I pulled him close, asked what he remembered. He said he had stepped outside to get air. Then nothing. Just black. He didn't remember the cemetery, didn't remember lying in the grass. I didn't tell him about his eyes or the way he had moved. I just said we needed to leave. By morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. We packed quickly and drove down the winding trail. The road was slick. Part of it washed out from the rain the night before. Mark sat slouched in the passenger seat, arms wrapped tight around himself, his skin cold to the touch. I kept talking to keep him awake. We reached the main road just before sunrise and pulled into a small town tucked between two ridges. The first motel we found had vacancy, and I didn't care about the price. We checked in, dropped our bags, and locked every window and door. I laid Mark down and watched him until the sun was high enough to burn through the mist. He seemed better after sleep, ate a little, even smiled, said he must have scared himself with all the cemetery talk. I tried to believe him. Told myself that stress could twist a person's memory. We had been isolated for days. It made sense. That night, I fell asleep with the TV on. Sometime after midnight, a crash pulled me out of bed. A window shattered. I rushed to the curtain. Outside, beneath the street lamp, a figure stands in the yard, covered in shadow, motionless. Then it charges the front door. I scream for Mark. He stumbles from the bed as the doorknob rattles hard. Once, then again. I grab his hand and drag him toward the back hallway. The door shakes from another hit. I hear glass crunch beneath boots. We run. Down the stairs. The figure follows. I can hear it. Fast. Heavy steps slamming behind us. In the stairwell, I trip. Mark grabs me. But something grabs him. His shoulder jerks back. A hand around his collar pulls hard. I pull harder. I scream. I will not let go. His shirt tears. The figure slips on the steps, just long enough for us to break free. We do not stop until we reach the street. Not until the motel is far behind and the town is silent again. In the morning, the window still bore the crack. A long, jagged line like a scar. I found a single muddy footprint beneath it, facing the door. The motel staff said it was probably just a drunk, or a branch, or an animal. But Mark did not remember. Not the chase. Not the broken glass. I never went back to the cabin. The deed paperwork remains unsigned. And at night, when wind shakes the walls, I sometimes hear the same soft tapping at the door, the same breathless pause between each knock. Like someone still watching, still waiting. The radio crackled just as I passed the 3rd-mile marker. My truck bounced along the gravel road, and through the static came a warped voice. Low, broken. Help! Buried below. Then silence. I stared at the dash for a moment, thinking it was interference. Probably just some overlapping signal from a ranger station. I reached for the dial to scan again, but the sound was gone. Just wind and the rattle of tools in the back seat. My name is Royce, 38. I work with a historical architecture firm based out of Knoxville. We take on old burial grounds, churches, and stone ruins, assessing what can be restored and what should be left alone. This trip was part of an early solo survey, a forgotten cemetery tucked near the base of a low mountain, once part of a family estate from the 1800s. The firm wanted to know if the ground was stable. My job was to map the terrain, scan for subsurface collapse, and record the condition of the crumbling headstones. It was supposed to be quiet work, a few days of measuring, tagging, and walking the perimeter. The nearest ranger post was 6 miles off, no other homes nearby. I parked the truck just past the faded boundary line and unpacked the equipment. My ground-penetrating radar clicked as it calibrated, and I ran a first sweep across the northern edge of the burial ground. Nothing unusual, but as I moved toward the middle row of sunken graves, the scanner beeped erratically. A soft vibration beneath my boots. The machine was detecting something unstable below, right where the signal on the radio had gone dead. The ground in that area dipped slightly, and the central headstone leaned forward like it was about to tip. A spiderweb of cracks spread out in the dirt around it, too precise to be from weather alone. I made a note and marked it for further scan in the morning. It was getting late, and the sky was already turning a dusky orange. That night, I stayed in the truck. I had rigged a sleep pad behind the seats and cracked the windows just enough to hear the woods. Around 2 in the morning, the headlights flickered. Not on their own. Someone had turned the switch. I sat up fast. The key was in my pocket. No sound outside. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the windshield. For a moment, in the beam of the dome light, I thought I saw movement near the edge of the clearing. A figure, squatting, watching. I stepped out but found nothing. Just freshly laid stones near the path. Still unsettled from rain the night before. Leaves rustled as wind moved through. Harder now. The equipment buzzed softly inside the truck. The readings had gone off scale again. I checked the creek bed to the west, where runoff from the hill passed under a collapsed fence. That was when I heard it. A single footstep behind me. Then the distinct sound of small rocks rolling down into water. But when I turned, no one was there. I backed toward the truck, keeping the flashlight low. My breath came faster. The night felt stretched. Wrong. Like something was holding its breath alongside me. I decided to call it then and there. Whatever I needed to finish, I would do in daylight. At first light, I returned to the faulted headstone. I stood just beside it, writing notes on the soil structure, when the earth gave out beneath me. The ground splits. Roots tear upward. The dirt collapses under my feet. I fall. My hand catches the edge of the stone. My body hangs over a hole, deep and narrow, darker than any trench I had ever measured. A voice rises from below, not a scream, a whisper. Endure. The sound coils around my spine. I feel fingers around my ankle, thin, pressing, pulling. I kick hard. I scream and scramble. My boot slips, but I catch myself on a buried root. I pull free. I do not look back. Not until I am back inside the truck, shaking, mud still on my pants. I drove until the cemetery was no longer visible in the mirrors, pulled over near a ranger access trail and set up camp just off the roadside. It was not much, just a fire ring, a few large stones, and the back of the truck for shelter, but it felt safer than staying among the graves. That night, I didn't sleep. The fire crackled but gave off little warmth. The wind pressed against the truck walls like it was trying to speak through them. I kept the radio off, afraid I might hear that same voice again, the one that came from underground. Around midnight, something scraped across the side panel. Not metal, not claws. Something softer, like fingers trailing along the frame. I gripped the handle of the hatchet I kept near the gear bags and waited for hours with my back to the truck wall. Nothing came. At first light, a pickup from the preservation office pulled up behind me. A pair of site supervisors stepped out, both older men in bright vests, friendly but stiff. They said there had been new access limits to the cemetery, unstable terrain. A recent landslide on the North Ridge had shifted the survey perimeter. I didn't argue. I let them walk me back into town and spent the morning in a temporary office where they logged my report and offered me coffee and crackers. They said the site would be reevaluated in a month, that I had done my job. I nodded. smiled, took the hint that I would not be going back. I told myself it was over, that I could drive back to Knoxville, write up my notes, and never speak of what happened. But as I reached for the keys and stepped back into my truck, something stopped me cold. In the rearview mirror, someone stands behind the vehicle, not far. One hand rests on the tailgate. Their head is bowed, their face unseen. I freeze. I stare. The light shifts. I look over my shoulder. No one is there. The lot is empty, but the handprint remains. In dirt, on glass, slowly, dragging downward. I slam the door shut and start the engine. The rear tires kick gravel. I drive fast, cutting through fog and early morning haze. Something moves beneath the truck, a shape, just for a second, then it vanishes. I do not stop. I do not check. Later that week, I washed the truck twice. The handprint returned both times, faint, but visible when the window fogged in the cold. The firm delayed my contract, said the insurance team flagged the site as unstable. They assigned someone else. My reputation never fully recovered. A quiet black mark next to my name. And, still, whenever I open a new map, whenever I run my fingers across the elevation scans, I see that hollow, the one I nearly fell into, the one that should not have been there. A narrow hole between graves, perfectly round, perfectly dark, waiting. Every morning, it was there, a wooden flower vase, narrow and hand-carved, resting at the base of the old grave, always at sunrise, just as the light came over the ridge. The shadow of the vase would stretch long across the moss-covered stone, and every morning, the shadow looked just a little too much like a hand. I used to carve headstones for a living. Brass frames, stone polish, careful chisel work. My father had done it before me, and his father before him. We were known in town for our precision, for getting the names right when others couldn't. That mattered, especially for the graves no one visited anymore. I came back to this cemetery after hearing that one of the oldest markers might be eligible for restoration. The stone had cracked, the name nearly worn away, but someone had been placing flowers there. No records listed who it belonged to. That drew me in, a forgotten grave, but not entirely forgotten. I brought my kit the first morning. Gloves, polish, wire brushes, tracing paper. Took pictures. The stone was rough and pitted, the surface eaten by time and frost. But something about it felt unsettled. The ground beneath the wooden vase was always damp, no matter the weather. And the vase itself vanished by nightfall, only to return by morning. I started waking up earlier. I wanted to see who placed it, but no matter how early I came, it was always already there. And then came the bells. Not real church bells. These were faint and distant, like wind catching the edge of an old bronze chime. I asked around, but there were no churches within hearing distance. The sound only came right before dawn, and only when I stood near the grave. The day I brought my stencil tools to prep the surface, I noticed something new. Beneath the corrosion, the faintest lines of letters began to appear. No one had touched the stone during the night, but it was as if the name had begun carving itself. Slowly, one stroke at a time. I stayed longer each day, studied the etching patterns, watched how the morning light fell over the ridge. I still hadn't seen anyone bring the vase, but now it looked cleaner, newer, like it had been sanded, oiled, maintained. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was polishing the metal frame I had fitted to the lower corner of the marker, careful not to scuff the older stone. I was alone. The sky had just turned that pale gray-blue before full light. I leaned in to brush off the last of the dust. A shadow moves behind me. Not fast, just enough to block the light from the edge of the stone. I turn. No one, but a voice breathes against my ear. Low. Close. Keep your promise. The hammer slips from my hand, clatters against the grave. I feel it then. A hand, light but firm, settles on my shoulder like someone trying to steady me. I spin again, faster this time. Nothing there. Only wind, but the pressure lingers. Like the memory of weight, I back away. The air feels heavy. My breath comes hard. I leave everything behind except the truck keys. I do not return until the next night. I spent the rest of that day at the town archive, digging through burial records, old church ledgers, donation logs. I asked anyone over 70 if they remembered a grave up on the North Ridge with no name. Only a wooden vase. One woman remembered. A man buried after the war. She said, no kin, no money for a stone, only a promise made by the gravedigger's apprentice to return and carve his name one day. I never knew if it was just a story or if she saw something in my face that made her want to believe it. That night, I returned with tools. Full kit this time. New stone, fresh engraving powder, carved borders, a hammer and chisel wrapped in cloth. I brought a new vase, too, sealed and varnished, carved with the same pattern as the one I kept seeing at dawn. The mountain air was still, no wind, no sound except for my boots on dry grass and the slight groan of the cart as I wheeled the new stone into place. I set the vase at the base of the grave and laid the tools out beside it, everything in order. Work began just before first light. The ground held steady, no dampness. The sun rose without fog. And for once, I heard no bells. I polished the new stone, etched the name I had found in the archive ledgers. First name, middle initial, last name. The letters went in smooth. No resistance. By mid-morning, I was done. I stood back and looked at the new marker. For the first time, the shadow it cast was just that, a shadow. No hands. No stretch beyond what made sense. I placed the wooden vase carefully at its foot and stepped back with a strange sense of peace. I thought that was it, that I had done what needed doing, the promise kept, the name restored. But then the sun began to dip. I was packing up my tools when I felt something change. The light behind me dimmed, not like sunset, but like something standing between me and the sky. A voice speaks my name, clear, right behind me. I cannot move. My throat locks. I turn. Nothing there. Only trees. The wind still. The stone upright. Then the voice again. Closer. The name. A whisper. Then a second phrase. Not a whisper anymore. Bound. Until remembered. I grab the hammer. My hand is shaking. The voice calls again. Same name. My name. Louder now. Final. Then silence. I spin with the hammer raised, my own breath loud in my ears, but no one is there. The stone is just a stone again. I do not stay. I walk fast to the truck and drive without checking the rear view. At home, I unpacked my kit to clean it. The hammer was scratched, fresh along the handle, but worse was the new stone. A piece had cracked, hairline but real, and the name, the same name I had carved so carefully, was fading. Weathered, as if weeks had passed, not hours. The next morning, I checked the old vase. Still there, but leaning, tilted like it had been knocked. Around it, small indentations in the dirt, not deep, but shaped like prints, as if someone had walked in a circle, watching. Each day since, I watched the sunrise through my kitchen window, and still, that shadow stretches across the stone, long and thin, shaped like a hand, reaching. The first recording played back on my second night in the hills. I had set the geolocation mic just before sunset, expecting nothing but wind and maybe a fox or two rustling past. But sometime after midnight, the sound cut through the static. A dull, rhythmic thumping, then a man's voice, barely above a whisper. Grave moved again. Mark's gone. As she was oppression. I'm Olivia, 30, a geotechnical surveyor contracted by the state to assess soil stability along a planned highway extension. Part of that job meant mapping an old mountaintop cemetery that would sit right near the edge of the new construction, the kind of site that would cause delays if anything unexpected turned up. No one mentioned a grave that moved. That morning, I flagged a white marble headstone as my main GPS marker, set the coordinates, logged the data. It stood straight, unremarkable, surrounded by pine needles and roots. I staked a survey ribbon in the soil and took reference photos from 3 angles. The next day, something was off. The grave had shifted. I measured it twice. The entire base had moved almost 2 meters northeast. No drag marks, no scuffs in the dirt. The trees around it hadn't bent or cracked. I double-checked the GPS logs, recalibrated. Nothing explained it. I assumed I had marked it wrong the first time. Maybe I was tired, but later that night, I woke to a soft beep from the recorder. It had turned itself on. The wind howled through the tent flaps, but layered beneath it was a voice, repeating, over and over, wrong side, wrong side. It didn't sound like interference. It sounded close. I stepped out with a flashlight. The marking tape on the grave was gone. One of the survey stakes had been pulled from the ground and replanted about 6 feet to the left. There were no footprints, no signs of wildlife, just the faint outline of the marker's former position in the dirt. I didn't sleep. The following day, I worked quickly, set new pins, took new photos, made sure everything was triple logged. When the light started to fade, I walked back to check the original marker one last time. What I saw made my stomach twist. The soil around the grave had sunken slightly, like something heavy had shifted beneath it. A shallow groove stretched from the edge of the stone toward the forest, almost like the entire grave had been dragged. Behind me, footsteps, soft but definite. I turned slowly. A black shape stands near the GPS stake. Still, head bowed. Its hand holds the red survey line. Taut, the cord stretches between us, pulling, like it's trying to reel me in. I stumble backward. My flashlight beam flickers. The figure does not move, but the cord twitches, tightens. I run. I ran until my legs buckled beneath me. The trail twisted downhill toward the gravel road where I had parked the company vehicle. Branches tore at my sleeves. My boots slipped on wet moss, and I cracked the side of my head against a flat stone. For a second, the world spun. Blood slid down the side of my neck, but I kept going. The truck was just ahead, cloaked in fog. I reached it, pulled the door open, and climbed in. The battery meter on my GPS flickered red. No signal. My hands shook as I grabbed the radio and called base. The radio hissed. Then the same voice from the recorder echoed back, louder now, overlapping with itself. Wrong side, over and over, like someone trying to get a message through from underground. I stayed in the truck all night, locked every door, covered myself in the emergency blanket, and gripped the handle of the field axe. No one came, but the wind never stopped. It carried voices I couldn't place. At dawn, 2 colleagues from base arrived. Both looked confused when I showed them the marker's movement on the GPS logs. They followed me to the site, but the grave was exactly where it had been when I first marked it. No trench, no drag marks, no stake out of place. They said maybe I had misread the terrain, that the fog had played tricks on me. They logged my notes and photos but never said much else. I left with them that afternoon, and they brought me back to the field station to rest. That night, I was placed in a side room of the station's cabin. Small cot, 1 lamp, quiet. I almost let myself believe it was over, until I woke to a soft thump under the floorboards. At first, I think it's an animal. Then I hear it again, a slow dragging sound, like something being pulled across bare earth. I sit up. I do not move. Through the gap beneath the door, I see it, a shadow at the end of the hallway, not moving, head bowed. One hand clutches a GPS stake, the same one I used. I grab my jacket and crawl into the utility closet. It smells of oil and dust. I try to steady my breath, then fingers slip under the door, slow, searching. One touches my boot. I kick hard. I am dragged forward, a full foot before I yank myself free. I burst out of the closet, slam the outer door, sprint into the cold night barefoot. They found me at dawn, barefoot and silent on the roadside. I could not explain. I did not try. I resigned 2 weeks later. No one believed me. Not really. And yet, even now, no matter where I go, no matter what town or trail, my phone sometimes pings a strange GPS location, a red dot, always shifting, always drifting farther from where that grave first was, but never gone, always just barely out of reach, like it is still moving, looking for the right side, and waiting for someone else to mark it wrong. Before we left, we made a rule. If you hear a bell in the woods, do not stop. Do not turn around. It was a rule my uncle gave us. Something he said every time we asked about the old family land in the hills. There used to be a church there, long before the town emptied out. No congregation, no records, just a bell that sometimes still rang when the wind was wrong. That was the part that stuck with me. The bell with no tower. My name is Reese, 34. I took my cousin Dale up into the mountains with me. Just a short trip, something quiet before his college semester started. He was 19, too curious for his own good. But I figured it was time he saw the place our uncle always warned us about. The first day passed easy. The air was sharp but not cold. The ground dry. We followed a broken trail past cedar thickets and up to the ridge where the graves lay scattered. Most of the headstones had been swallowed by moss and time. That night, the fire crackled low, and we both drifted off under a thin tarp. Then the sound came. Not once, 3 times. A bell, not echoing from the valley, not distant. Each ring is clear, sharp, too close. I sat up, heart already pounding. Dale turned toward me in the dark. He didn't say anything at first, just stared into the trees like he was listening to something more than we could hear. The next morning, he barely ate. Said he dreamed of people standing behind the trees, not speaking, not blinking, just waiting. He kept whispering the same thing over and over. They're waiting for us. I told him to shake it off. Later that day, we found it, a flat stone among the older graves. Newer than the others, but still weathered. No name, just a carved outline of a bell. And beneath it, the words, "The rung remains." I felt my stomach turn. The stone was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been under sunlight. Dale didn't say anything. He just knelt beside it, brushing dirt from the carved lines. That evening, the woods went quiet too fast. No wind, no birds. I told Dale to stay near the fire while I boiled water. When I turned around, he was already walking toward the tree line. "Dale," I shouted. He didn't respond. His steps were steady, like he was following something I couldn't see. Then the bell rang again, not deep in the woods, right near us. I could feel the vibration in my chest. I ran. When I reached him, his ankles were wrapped in something that should not have been there. A chain, rusted, thin, but shaped like a bell pull, twisting up from the forest floor and coiling around his legs. I followed the line with my eyes. Deep in the brush, something was pulling it. The chain jerks once. Dale stumbles forward. I grab him. The chain tightens. Something tugs harder. I reach for my knife. I pulled the blade from my belt and slashed at the chain. Sparks flew where rust met steel. The sound it made was high. Wrong. Like metal scraping bone. With a final jerk, the link snapped and Dale collapsed into me. We didn't wait. I threw his arm over my shoulder and dragged him back to the clearing. The bell kept ringing behind us. Slower now, each toll stretching longer, as if whatever pulled the chain was still trying to follow. We reached the edge of a shallow cave near the ridge and scrambled inside. We blocked the opening with our packs and zipped our sleeping bags tight across the entrance. Dale was still shaking. I held the knife close and listened, waiting for the sound of metal on stone, but the bells stopped. That night, there were no dreams, no whispers, no chains rattling through pine. Dale slept through to morning for the first time since we arrived. The air was still, the sky cloudless. It felt clean again. For a few minutes, I even believed we had left it behind. We packed slowly, not talking much, just ready to be out of the woods. I stepped outside first. That was when I saw it. Dozens of thin iron chains stretched out from the tree line, all laid across the forest floor, all leading to the mouth of our cave, as if they had slithered there in the dark. I stepped back. Dale brushed past me, still groggy, not looking down. He crosses one of the chains. The moment his boot touches it, the bell rings. Loud, sharp, then again. The chain wraps around his ankle. I leap forward. The chain tightens. Dale hits the ground hard. The links burn into his skin. He screams. I grab a stone from the ground and smash at the chain with everything I have. Blood runs from my hand where the edges cut me. The links snap just as he begins to slide toward the trees. I pulled him back into the cave. He was pale, his breath shallow. The chain left a mark around his leg, blackened, like it had been pressed by hot wire. We waited there until full daylight before moving again. We didn't stop until we hit asphalt. I kept looking over my shoulder. Back in town, we sat in silence as the bus pulled away from the edge of the forest. The farther we went, the easier it was to believe it had all been in our heads. Until we heard it. One final bell ring. Not in the woods. Not behind us. This time, it rang from the back seat.